A vision of home corrupted, a functionary's world upended, a friendship recomposed. Welcome to Hidden Oaks. David thought the punishment over the butterfly would have been more severe. His parents were initially upset, especially his mom. She was a short, sharp woman with spray-tan skin, bleached blonde hair, and bony elbows constantly bent and tucked at her side. Her pointy posture made her resemble a crow David would sometimes see perched along the power lines on his bus ride home from school. When she scolded him, the cawing resemblance became uncanny. No video games for 1 week was the sentence, which was carried out with no supervision or effort from either his mother or father. David felt insulted by their lack of commitment, even though it was meant to inconvenience him. Without any implementation, David could continue to play them after school when he got home or on weekends when his parents slept in, but he didn't. He wanted to listen to his parents. He didn't know why. It had been 5 full days since David had found himself wandering the banks of that magical river, billowed by phantom winds and kissed by illusionary sunlight. He tried to find explanations for the phenomenon within himself. Maybe he'd fallen asleep. Maybe he had a medical event that would have caused him to hallucinate. There was a large medical dictionary in their hearth room stacked on a mahogany bookshelf above the granite fireplace. Just this afternoon, David used a folding chair to reach upwards like a construction crane to grab it. He could barely get there. He just had to stretch out onto his toes. He barely snatched it, using his fingertips to grip onto the thick binding. The cover was a glossy baby blue, which made it slippery. David nearly dropped it on his descent. This wasn't the first time he'd had something wrong with him and had to do his own research. More often than not, his parents would send him to school sick. Sometimes his homeroom teacher would notice and he'd be sent home, with his mom or dad ridiculing him for his illness from the front seat, as if he'd chosen to feel miserable. He actually preferred feeling gross at school over those endless lectures. David immediately jumped to the index to look up hallucinations. He had learned his lesson about errantly paging through the book. Sprinkled in amongst its pages was a variety of vivid pictures and illustrations. Blemishes, wounds, organs. The reference guide was the definition of thorough when it came to depicting the human body. David found hallucinations, carefully peeled away the pages surrounding its location, and read about the root causes. Drugs, schizophrenia, depression, alcohol withdrawal, seizures, migraines. The list was extensive. None of it really scared David as much as what he'd seen in the hallway outside his room. A real-life medical ailment would be easier than being haunted. Plus, his parents might finally pay attention to him. Despite the somewhat gruesome research he'd done earlier, David felt a bit more positive about his situation. The ghostly river had not come knocking on his door again. He had not noticed anything odd or unexplained in his house, even if he was too terrified to truly inspect it. Maybe it was just a dream. The evening had been cold, murky, and unremarkable. The November weather was caught in a holding pattern, with the crispness of winter and the heated edge of summer unable to fully commit to a conclusion. His parents had ordered Pizza Hut for dinner and ate it in silence while watching a Seinfeld rerun. Both went to their opposite studies for leftover work. Feeling abandoned, David went to read books in his bedroom until it was time for bed, or when he felt as if he should be going to sleep. It was similar to his punishment. There was never any follow-through when it came to parenting him. David heard the scratching sound shortly after midnight. The scrapes were distant yet continuous, sounding through plaster, wood, paint, carpet, and vents. They were heavy enough for him to hear from upstairs, but distant enough for him to know that they were not inside his bedroom. They sounded abnormally perfect, with no pattern yet no randomness. David tried to push them out of his mind. He even covered his head with multiple pillows until all he could smell was linen and his own breath. It was suffocating. He felt like Sonic the Hedgehog drowning in the pink slime of the chemical zone. David hated waking his parents up for anything, but the sound would not stop. He needed to tell them about it. David's mom and dad's bedroom was opposite of his, on the far side of the house. They had a master bedroom with their own bathroom, though David's father used the one in the basement because he said the fan was a jet engine. He called it his office, which was a joke that made David laugh originally, but his father had repeated hundreds of times. Why couldn't dads think of any new jokes? Even though some time had passed since the butterfly event, David never spent more than a few seconds inside the hallway. In the deep of night, it was even worse. The dark seemed limitless. A sole nightlight with a plastic seashell fixture sat glowing in an outlet in the corridor's center. As he wobbled toward it in his flannel pants and red shirt, his chubby feet tangled inside of each other and he nearly fell. The furnace bellowed intermittently in the background. The air still lingered with a chemical bite after David's mom had scrubbed the walls and carpet repeatedly after the butterfly had appeared. "Almost there," David whispered to himself. The melody of his little voice surprised him. Eventually, he turned left at the intersection, and he was at their room. "All right, I'm going in," David said with a sigh. He crept through the door, turning the brass knob, which clicked loudly. There was a small entryway ahead of him which turned right toward his parents' enormous bed. In a few seconds, he was standing at the foot of it, gently shaking his father's right ankle. Dad, I hear something scratching on the side of the house or something," he whispered. His mom kept snoring and pulled her face beneath the blanket. She had a black sleep mask on. David was happy only his dad woke up. Even though both his parents were distant most of the time, he was pretty certain his father loved him, at least a little bit. What, Dave, what's going on?" his father said, sitting up. He was tall, burly, with long arms, balding brown hair, and thick, squarish glasses he often fell asleep with. He coughed and rubbed his oily forehead, which caught the illuminated glint of a TV endlessly playing in the back of the bedroom. David's father could not sleep without it. "There's something scratching outside or in the house. I can hear it in my bedroom," David said. "Oh, it's probably just a mouse again or something, caught between the walls or trying to get out. It might even be a deer rubbing up against the house. Whatever it is, David, don't worry about it. Go back to sleep," David's father said. He laid back down and let out an enormous fart. "Come on, Dad, I'm scared. I don't want to sleep in the room," he said. "What? No, you're not sleeping in here. You're too old for that. Besides, the job site opens at 5 a.m. I've got to get some sleep. You don't need to be scared of some mice or anything. You're a lot bigger than them anyway," he said. David's dad owned a construction company. Getting up early was wielded as an excuse for avoiding most situations. "Dad, please," David said, pulling on his toes through the blanket. "No, now get out of here before you wake up your mother," he said with a snort. David hurried back to his bedroom. He could still hear the sound as clearly as before. He hoped his father could too now. Why didn't he ever take him sincerely? Why did he always feel defeated? After about 20 minutes of torturous contemplation, David decided to walk downstairs to the living room, which sat overlooking the backyard. He didn't expect to find a mouse or deer or anything really, but he needed to know it wasn't some other nightmare or monster from his now unmanageable imagination. He grabbed his stuffed panda Hobbs, his Nerf gun, and a plastic curved sword, which he tucked through a hole in the elastic band of his pajama pants. He threw on a black hoodie to camouflage himself. This made him pause. He'd gotten chubbier, so the cold zipper stung the top of his chest as he connected it. A bit of skin had gotten caught between the metal teeth. David was too scared to scream or cry. He didn't want to disturb the silence. It owned these moments, and if he wanted to move through it, he needed to respect it and be silent too. David tried to muffle the sounds of his bare feet along the carpet, wood, and ceramic tiles as he moved. His breathing seemed to stop between each stride, which panicked him. He'd almost forgotten how to perform this basic bodily function. As he approached the stairs, open doors to spare rooms would pass in front of him. Each time he noticed them, the dark spaces with bookshelves, beds, and desks looked back at him with an almost surprised curiosity, as though even they expected him to be sleeping. David reached the stairs and foyer, then paused. He sighed and looked longingly at the chandelier he'd turned on during the dark afternoons and evenings when he was alone. He wanted to turn on lights as he explored. He even set his chubby fingers upon their white switches, but he didn't want to draw attention to himself. If there was something monstrous scratching away at a wall somewhere, he didn't want to scare it away or alert it to his presence. From the top of the stairs, through the bay window above the front door overlooking the yard and driveway, the moonlight had forged a teal-pearl landscape of almost dreamlike material. The empty tree branches, the jagged and patterned rooftops, the dead leaves packed against the curbs of quiet roads. They all seemed frozen against the sable glow, as if the scene itself wanted to bask in the tranquility. It reminded David of the end of time from Chrono Trigger. Everything stopped and stood still. Time didn't need to move. Nothing dared disturb it. Except for the scratching, which had followed him throughout his trip, a lost echo in the seemingly silent foundation. "It's driving me crazy," David said to himself, heading down the stairs. David got to the bottom and stopped. He needed to move even slower. He'd pass through a few large rooms before he could see the backyard. First was the kitchen, which wrapped around the back wall on his right. Everything looked menacing in the gloom. Knives, plates, cups, mugs, the sink, microwave, and even the grumbling cube of a refrigerator had an edge of villainy in the shadows. There was a little light available for him to get his bearings. A few yellow beams gleamed off a clock display on the coffee maker. David couldn't focus on the actual time of night, just the halo of gold blinking out from the device. It gave enough definition to the counter in the center island for him to worm his way through the room. The dodging reminded him of one of the ball in the maze games you have to tilt around till you landed in the hole. He'd gotten one out of a toy pit in Perkins when he went out for breakfast with his grandparents, who he seldom spent time with. David paused as he entered the dining room. It was the final stop before he reached the living room that overlooked the backyard. "I'm almost there," he whispered, tiptoeing past a table. He suddenly stopped and scampered back behind it. A square figure stood next to a couch in the center of the living room. It was tilted and still. He dropped his stuffed animal behind his leg to shield it and aimed his dart gun at the shape. He squinted his eyes some more. Moonlight and shadow started to even out over the chairs, end tables, entertainment center, and speakers that sat in the center of the room. The air smelled soapy from the carpet cleaner his mom was continuously using. The furnace's fans spun in the background in twirling hums. An errant gust of wind made the windowsills murmur and ache. David laughed. He was staring at a pile of phone books his father had brought inside. Somehow, at least for now, his dad had avoided his mom's pestering to put them away. David smiled in relief and adjusted his glasses. There were streaks of grease from the pizza they had earlier. They smeared the details around him slightly. He rubbed the bottom of his teeth with his tongue, which felt dry and stinging, and calmly walked over to the solitary pillar to poke it triumphantly with his foot. A color filled the room. It was a flashing turquoise which jumped over the white walls in shimmering beats. A twirling shape sped by, shaking paintings, lamps, and the polyester leaves of small fake trees his mother used to decorate the space. David dropped to the ground, covering his head with his arms. He opened his eyes to a room that looked normal, except for the faint glow of blue-green light crawling in from the row of rectangle windows staring out into the night. The luminescent gems coruscated along the ceiling repeatedly. There was a storm overhead that was laden with lightning, but devoid of any thunder. David stood up slowly and found his legs. His whole body was scared, forcing his mind to search for his limbs before giving them a thought to move. It made him feel tremendously self-conscious, like there was a crowd of unseen eyes watching nearby. He eventually wobbled over to spy on the sources of his unknown radiance. The smell of ammonia and vinegar burnt his nose. His mother scrubbed the glass religiously. The stench had clung to their surface. The scene was hard for David's mind to interpret. Just behind the house on the flat sheet of frosted grass was a sort of glowing dial. It was spinning, as if it were a clock desperately pushing time through its arms. It wasn't made out of any physical material, but simply light itself. It had the same indigo aura, only it looked to be split into multiple individual flames, which were circling in a vibrant thrumming just a few inches off the ground. The sound was almost mechanical, but more akin to when a fly buzzes too close to your ear. Above it, floating in the air, was an exact replica of David's house. Walls, siding, windows, gutters, doors, shingles. It was a reflection of his home. Even stranger, the image wasn't forged with the same detail you'd see etched in a mirror or photograph, but out of something gravelly and porous. It looked almost sandy, only it sparkled, catching the moonlight in glints and shimmers, as though it wanted to compete with the stars themselves. "It's our house. It's our house exactly," David said softly, afraid to speak too loudly because it might dissipate the magical scene. The rotating disk of blue began to intensify. The image grew until it was the size of a small car. Around the image, shadows started to form. They had shoulders, heads, and necks bent upwards, staring at the event from below. The dust-drawn copy started to tremble and rotate. Then in one squeal of steaming energy, it sparked a variety of smaller images. Hallways, floors, doorknobs, beds, shoes, tables, chairs, and lastly, a fibrous drawn mirror of himself, peeking through the window at that very moment. It knew he was there. The spinning fires rose slowly, copying one of the bioluminescent creatures from the depths of the ocean floor. They continued even higher until the bulbs of flame vanished over the forest behind David's house. "It's gone. Where did it go?" David whispered to himself. Then he noticed it. First, the ground growled with weight as it rose upwards to an obscene height. David couldn't see the exact details of its form. There was too much gloom. The frame of the being seemed to summon the darkness around it. As the shadows circled and pulsed around the form, it walked forward into the trees. The symmetry of it was jagged, uneven, and piled. It had an almost human outline, but was overgrown, bulbous, and dangling with strange decorations. Despite its mass, it seemed to both pass and surround the branches as it vanished into the forest. The sight of it made David sweat, tremble, and forget where and who he was. He stepped away from the window, and as he did, a variety of pictures played behind his quivering eyes. There were crumpled castles and cities of old rock and mortar drenched in red moss and ivy. There were large lakes so clear and silvery they reflected a purple sky. And lastly, there was a round pit lined with machinery falling deep into the ground, where not even light dared to go. It whispered to him, "David, David, David." A hand fell on his shoulder. It was calloused and cracked, hooking into the fibers of his shirt. It was his father. "What are you doing out here, Dave?" His father's deep voice was higher, almost comical with surprise. David stared at him blankly, as if he was a stranger. "I wanted to find the noise," he said. "What? Why?" his father said sleepily and almost concerned. "I just had to, that's all." "Okay, well, let's go to bed. It's nothing. Go back to bed before you wake up your mother." David clung to his hand as they walked back to his bedroom. Outside, the shape had vanished. It wouldn't be long now until she was ready.
I'm going crazy. Nutters. Screws loose? I freaking lost the screws. I'm taping this because I gotta tell someone, even if it's just future me. That's assuming there is a future me and I don't get taken away. I'm not someone who likes to keep things in. I never have been. I see something wrong, someone's gonna hear about it. They need to hear about it. Remember that kid in elementary school that was a tattletale? That was me. If I can't run in the halls, then why should they? Damn straight the teacher's gonna hear about it. I'm not really that much different now than I was then. Just taller, I guess. Average-ish height, dark hair, dark eyes, just kind of plain looking. I'm super skinny, though, just like when I was a kid. I need to poke extra holes in my belt because the belt companies are a bunch of jerks. Mom tells me to try suspenders like Grandpa, but seriously? Anyway, I still like to tell on people. It gives me control and delicious feeling of superiority. I am not ashamed to admit it. It's fun. That feeling of threatening to tell on someone is so goddamn satisfying. Yeah, why do you think I became a cop? I mean, I'm mostly a cop. They won't give me a gun or let me poke people over, but I can hand out all the parking tickets I want. Why would I want to be a cop with a badge and all that? Who wants that kind of responsibility? I can give two shits about helping people. I'm helping the city bring in money. What more do you want from me? It generally doesn't take me long to find what I want. I can spot a car parked too closely to a fire hydrant from over a block away. I don't even need to use my measuring tape. No joke. I memorize license plates and recognize repeat offenders immediately. I've been doing this for a while and can always sense if a car's been parked in the same spot for too long. It's like a sixth sense. Anyways, I've started seeing weird things when I was wandering the streets of New Brighton looking for my next target. Like really weird. It started pretty tame, I guess. I'd park my Cushman. Yeah, I drive a Cushman around. Badass, right? But the assholes at the station won't let me put a siren on it or anything cool like that. Anyway, I'd park up on the sidewalk to get out the pad to write up someone for parking at an expired meter. If these cheap sausages would just feed the meter, they wouldn't have to deal with the pad. I pull up next to the car on the sidewalk, and by the time I turn around, the car was gone. This happens from time to time, but usually I hear the squeaking of tires or see taillights. Usually just laugh it off and grudgingly give credit for them having won the round. I always get them next time. But now, I kid you not, the car would just friggin' disappear. I'd turn around to grab the plates, and there would be nothing there. Just an empty curb. No dust, no smoke, no tires marks, no nothing. It was as if the car had never been there. This black sedan kept doing this. I am absolutely convinced it was the same car, but I can never catch it. It only happened sometimes, but never more than once a day. But it kept happening. Who could I tell about this? Nobody. Do you think I'm going to admit that I keep letting somebody get away? Hell no, it makes me angry just thinking about it. This is just the start of the craziness. I saw that one starship that Anakin hijacks in Phantom Menace, double parked over on Rice Creek Boulevard with a license plate saying JJ04EVA, which I assume means Jar Jar Forever. Really? There's someone else out there who thought that Jar Jar Binks was the best part of that movie? I spent some time pondering the fact before I realized it's probably more odd that a frickin' spaceship was parked on my streets. Naturally, it flew away before I could get my Cushman and started tooling on over there. No, before you ask, I could not see who was in the cockpit, nor am I high on midi-chlorians or whatever. It was probably Jar Jar, because why not? At least I only saw that once. That was annoying. What happened another time seriously pissed me off. The pad transformed into a coloring book. That's the only explanation. Completely normal, right? Well, okay, so maybe some fig nuts was pulling a prank and swapped it, but I seriously don't see how. The pad I use to write out my parking tickets is my ticket to greatness. The more tickets I write, the more revenue I bring into the city, and the closer I get to some goddamn recognition from the department. The pad slides into a case attached to my Cushman that I put together on my own time. It's precious to me, all right? One of those many times I tried busting that cursed black sedan, I reached over to grab it, and instead pulled out a stupid coloring book. It was titled Happy Happy Parking Time and had a picture of my Cushman on it, with what I assumed was me standing next to it as a skinny guy wearing a uniform and a big dumb shit grin on his face. Yeah, definitely me. I freaking love giving tickets, what can I say? I stared at this thing completely dumbfounded. What the hell happened to my real pad? I had just used the thing over on Mississippi Boulevard on a standard parking meter violation no less than 5 minutes before. There is no way somebody could have taken it. After my heart started beating again, I started paging through the book out of morbid curiosity. The pictures were just a bunch of nonsense. A dinner plate at the top of a tree, busted one of those old-timey 1x land, 2x sea lamps, some long mushrooms growing out the eyes of a skull, a basket of Easter eggs, and a hand with too many big long E.T. fingers. There was one of a big-ass fish that was pretty cool, but most of it was just weird. Kind of reminded me of the junk you'd see on one of those shareware clip art CDs. Oh, do you know what really tipped it off? My lucky pen was missing too, replaced by a goddamn crayon. Chartreuse. Stupid name for a stupid color. At least it could have been blue. As you probably guessed, that black sedan was long gone by the time I threw the coloring book on the floor of my badass ride in disgust. The pad never showed back up. That was a whole ordeal down at the station. I took the battery out of my smoke alarm and burned that freaky coloring book back at my apartment right away after work. I sure as hell wasn't going to tell them about the coloring book. Are you insane? It's like when I burned that warning I had for speeding when I was 16. It did not happen. They don't take me seriously down at the station already. What would they really say? I told them some punk kid snatched it out of my hands and dashed off like an Olympic sprinter. I didn't give chase because I had pulled my groin the night before. I think they totally bought it. Without a word, I was handed a new pad and told to hit the streets. I like when it's put that way. It makes me feel like a badass cop going to keep the streets safe. Things were normal for a few days. I didn't see the black sedan and the pad didn't disappear again. That's when it happened. Everything turned crazy, and I had to start counting the normal things that happened each day instead of the crazy things. I swear, I saw multiple families of penguins waddling along, happy as can be, on the sidewalks. I assume they were happy. I guess I've never seen an angry penguin. I saw a group of ninjas get out of a tiny car, clown car style. Technically, they were parked the correct distance from the curb, and their license plates were right, so I didn't say anything. I was just too puzzled. Toddlers were driving cars. Old men were being pushed around in strollers, and every single person over on 29th Avenue looked exactly identical. So clearly, I'm just going frickin' nutters. The worst was when the parking meters started messing with me too. Most of the tickets I give out are to unattended cars. As such, I get an extra thrill when the car's owner is around to get the ticket. That's a lot less common, so the thrill of these encounters is intoxicating. Now, parking meters are conspiring to take these experiences away from me. It's happened several times now. I spot an expired meter across the street and make my way over there. I begin preparing the ticket and notice the owner unlocking their car. Yes, that means I get to hand them the ticket personally and watch them squirm. The owner rolls down the window as I knock on it with the ticket, only to point at the fully fed meter. What the hell? My double takes and triple takes change nothing. The meter is full, so the ticket is void. Voiding the ticket itself isn't a big deal. I avoid plenty of tickets myself because my handwriting is terrible. I like to blame the fact that I'm left-handed on this, but truthfully, I'm just lazy. No, voiding the ticket isn't a big deal, but the goddamn moron of a person gets to tell me that I am wrong. I am so disgruntled by this point. I'm ready to explode. This has happened 7 times in a row. I couldn't take it. I went home sick for the rest of the day. Someone had to be messing with me. Was someone feeding the meters all sneaky-like when I was turned around? I realize I'm not very popular, but how do I explain all these other weird things? They have to be related to the meters somehow, right? I haven't even mentioned the fire hydrants that disappear and take tickets away. There's plenty of heart disease and cancer in the family, but no mental illness. But clearly, I'm going crazy. Everybody around me is acting completely normal, like they're not seeing any of these things that I see. I'm not a big believer in the paranormal or any of that nonsense, but I confess to feeling a palpable sense of darkness in the area. What the hell am I supposed to do? Have I fabricated this darkness to help reassure myself I'm not losing my goddamn mind? Or is the darkness real and causing my madness? I really don't know. Who do I tell this? Mom won't listen to anything I say if it's got nothing to do with her daytime stories. That coloring book weirded me out and had some really bizarre stuff in it besides that handsome guy on the cover. I didn't understand any of the scenes. Was it trying to tell me something? I shouldn't have burned it. Things definitely got worse after that. Even as I'm recording this, a sharp feeling of dread is going through my brain. Something isn't right. Well, I've established that already. Why am I trembling? I can hardly hold the tape recorder. I gotta go throw up. I can't take this. Look, what was that rumble? Oh, Jesus, my kitchen is starting to glow. Oh, shit, is there somebody in my apartment? What the
Elizabeth was struggling. It wasn't the, I just don't want to get out of bed because it's a rainy day kind of struggle either. It was the type of struggle that had begun to make her more and more worried about being alone. The kind of struggle that felt like a dark shadow was trying to envelop every ounce of light that was left in her body. The type of struggle that made people remark, "I'm sorry you're sad. You should try to be happy and smile," instead of looking and listening to the hard reality that Elizabeth was going through. The typically strong, bubbly, boisterous cheerleading coach was now everything that she never wanted to become. As she awoke and rose from her bed, her long, slender legs, now covered in weeks of stubble from having no motivation to shave, slid from the covers and plummeted to the floor with a thud. Her naturally fit and toned physique had started to give way, and there were the beginnings of a noticeable but still ever so slight increase to her waist size. Her long, cascading, dulled brunette hair that she generally wore curled now lay down her back in strings of unwashed tatters. Lately, she didn't even want to see herself in the mirror anymore. The usual glow of her face had given way to dark bags under her eyes, a consistent purse of her lips, and the look of emptiness in her eyes. This was not the Elizabeth that the New Brighton community knew. It wasn't the Elizabeth that anyone knew. Typically, she had spent countless hours being active in the community, teaching youth cheerleading and inspiring others during their own struggles. Since a young age, she had worked closely with the church. It had been a part of her life for as long as she could remember. Most people who knew her wondered how she kept up with everything she did. The bake sales, making it to every high school event, raising her son Max, having a beautiful home, and everything in between. But ever since the incident that seemed to have started in Hidden Oaks Park, the community and Elizabeth were not the same. A week ago, Elizabeth had mustered up what little energy she had to go to the grocery store. The cupboards were bare of everything besides some canned beets and dried navy beans, and anything left in the fridge had now expired. It had been days since she had eaten much of anything at all other than enough water to live and a few stale saltine crackers. Deep inside, she knew that she needed to consume more in order to keep her strength up, if she had any hope at all of finding Max. Since the major storm, he was nowhere to be found. She and her husband, Jeff, had gone to the police, who said they were doing their best, but there was a lot of damage to sift through, several missing persons, and their resources were stretched thin. After only a week and a half, they had stopped receiving updates. They couldn't believe that a missing 4-year-old wouldn't be a top priority, but it soon became clear it was a reality they would have to face. Realizing they would have to help themselves, Jeff had taken off weeks ago to try to find him. It had been a tipping point for their relationship. Jeff insisted that Elizabeth stay home in case Max came back. This all only added to the rising tide of immense guilt and sadness that Elizabeth was feeling. What kind of mother would lose her son? The thought pierced in her head as she dragged her heavy legs forward to the store. Along her walk, from the corner of her eye, she noticed a simple piece of paper, crookedly stapled to a light pole that was barely standing. The top section had splintered and fallen in the chaos weeks before. It read, "Storm support. Come talk and share stories with others at St. Kateri's Catholic Church. Meetings on Wednesdays at 7 o'clock p.m. Then scrawled below this in thick black Sharpie, "Gather brothers and sisters to be with friends during this trying time." Elizabeth had worked with the church on many other community projects, but she hadn't had the motivation to leave the house since losing her son. And now, what if Max came home and she wasn't there? But she felt a faint glimmer of hope shine at the idea of this group meeting. Maybe someone there had seen something that could help. The rest of the week was just as much of a struggle as the day before. The days would chase the nights, moments crawling by. The hand on Elizabeth's wall clock just kept ticking, yet still no Max, and still no energy to be the pillar that her family expected her to be. Laying on the couch, staring at the hands on the clock as they wound at a snail's pace around their track, Elizabeth jumped at the sudden break in the silence as the phone began to ring. She watched it from across the room, and after the fifth ring, the answering machine message began to play. She heard her own voice.
"You've reached Jeff, Buffy, and Max. Leave a message after the beep, and we'll call you back."
Hearing the cheeriness that was no longer present when she spoke and the names of her family made tears sting at the corners of her eyes. Then, a new but equally familiar voice came to her ears as the caller left a message.
"Hey, Buffy, it's Ellie. I know it's been a bit, but I was thinking about you. Call me back when you get a chance."
The flat tone of her old friend's words told her that Ellie might be having just as hard a time as she was. Minutes passed as Elizabeth lay convincing herself to stand up and return the call. It had been a long-standing Wednesday tradition, with gaps here and there, for Elizabeth to call or get together with her friend Ellie to check in and catch up. They had been friends since early childhood, having met in kindergarten. They had hit it off immediately. No one could separate the two of them. Every weekend, they were over at each other's houses. They had grown up practically sisters. That had solidified even more when Elizabeth lost her father in the first grade. She had stayed with Ellie until their mother could get back on her feet. Elizabeth would never forget what Ellie's family had done for her. Even throughout high school, they were basically tied at the hip. But as with many friendships, as the two had grown older, they grew apart. Yet when they called to chat or got together on Wednesdays, it was always like they had just seen each other the day before. Ellie had been really busy and quite stressed out the last time they had spoken. Between this and Elizabeth barely having a drive to eat and care for herself, they hadn't talked in a while. Elizabeth finally brought herself to her feet. The group meeting at the church was at 7 p.m. She decided to call Ellie back and ask if she would like to go with her to the meeting. She thought it could be a good opportunity for Ellie to share some of her grief since her father's unexpected passing. She dialed the phone.
"Hello?
"Hey, Ellie."
Buffy! I wasn't sure if you'd call back. It's been forever. I'm sorry, I've been so overwhelmed with Dad. Well, you know. And don't even get me started on Eddie. How are Max and Jeff?
Wow, it's really good to hear your voice. Life has been a little crazy lately, which I'm sure you of all people can understand. Jeff and Max. Max is missing. He has been since that big storm that the police keep talking about happened. Jeff has been out looking for him. I haven't seen them in weeks.
Wait, what? Oh my God, are you okay? I had no idea that Max was missing. I feel like I don't even know what day it is anymore. What can I do? Should we go out looking? Do we need to make posters? I have a super cute picture of Max from last summer. Do you want me to come over? We can talk about it.
Well, that's why I was calling. There's this neighborhood support meeting or something at the church tonight, and I was hoping you would be willing to come with me. I know you're really busy, but I could really use a friend to come with. I know you're going to be upset with me bringing this up again, but you still haven't felt comfortable talking about your dad either. I mean, you didn't even tell me he was in the hospital or that he was, well, not doing well. I mean, he's like a dad to me too. This could be a chance for you to share or deal with some of that yourself.
Buffy, I just don't.
Ellie, I know you aren't the biggest fan of the church, and dealing with your dad's stuff has been really hard. On top of that, your brother is back, and I know he stresses you out. But mostly, I really could use your support right now.
All right, Buffy. What time do you want me there? I'm not sure I'm ready to share things about my dad and stuff, but I'll come for you.
Thanks, Ellie. I'm excited to see you, and I hope this will do us both some good. I love you. See you later.
Elizabeth took a deep sigh. She felt bad for calling Ellie out like that about her dad and brother, but sometimes friends told you the things that you didn't want to hear, but needed to hear anyway. They had been there for each other for a long time in this way. Even when Elizabeth had lost her own father, Ellie and her family had been there for her. Elizabeth thought it was only right that she return the favor when she had the opportunity. Elizabeth had so much to do to get ready. Shower, wash her hair, twice, which she was not proud of. She had no clean clothes, so she needed to do a quick wash. 7 o'clock came quickly. Elizabeth was nervous to see Ellie. It had been a few weeks since they had seen each other, and that phone conversation had been less than pleasant, but sometimes that's what Ellie needed. Then to also just drop the bomb about Max. Things were feeling all too real now. Buffy was waiting outside of St. Kateri's church for Ellie. She wanted to walk in together, both for her own strength and Ellie's. She also thought their normally happy greeting would make Ellie more open to sharing in the meeting. Buffy saw Ellie as she approached. She looked tired, her body slouching more than normal, like it wanted to melt away into the ground. But the second her eyes caught Elizabeth's, she lit up. Her eyes gleamed with joy, and a smile crossed her whole face like she was seeing family again for the first time in a long time.
Hey, girl. I've missed you. How are you hanging in there?
It is so good to see you. I've needed this so much. I really hope that this group thing will be helpful too. It's been so hard without Max.
I can't believe that you didn't tell me he was missing. How long has it been?
Well, you know when that big storm went through? It was then. He was outside playing in the yard, no different than any other day. You know how curious he is. I heard the winds. It was a nice day, and then all of a sudden everything changed. And when I looked outside, he was just...
Oh, yeah, the storm. Well, that was eerie. What do you think happened? Is Jeff out looking for him? Do you think somebody may have taken him to the hospital or something?
I just don't know. Hey, it's almost 7. It looks like people are heading in. Why don't we go get a seat?
The church gathering hall was in the basement, and it was drab, but clearly someone had tried to make it feel slightly cozy, if that was possible. It was walled with rough-hewn stone blocks that would sometimes sweat in the heat of summer. The whole place had a damp, mildewy smell, as though it had flooded at one time and they hadn't dried the carpet out properly. Someone had tried to mask this scent with a few apple cinnamon Glade plug-ins, but it really just ended up smelling like mildewy apples. Metal folding chairs whose dents and scratches showed their age and well-use were all lined up in a circle. No one chair was farther in front of the other. Most of them were full, but there were 2 empty spots next to one another on the near side of the circle, so Elizabeth and Ellie hurried over to sit together. At least they should sit and be sort of comfortable if they were going to be here. A priest walked about, and Ellie shifted in her seat. She still felt uncomfortable being here in the church. She had never been a religious person, but the rift between her and any kind of belief in God had grown in recent years. So many questions that she had about everything she had learned over the past year. How could there be a God that allowed such things to exist and occur? Elizabeth leaned over toward Ellie in her chair and whispered.
This is Father Witherow. You would really like him. He's kind of mysterious, but so thoughtful.
Ellie took a moment to take in the man. He looked worn out, like sleep had been a distant friend that he hadn't seen in a while. Although exhaustion was written boldly across his face, he still gave a smile and tried using an upbeat tone when addressing the group. It felt very forced to Ellie. But in these times, who could be happy? The whole group didn't look much better. 17 people of various ages sitting around in a circle. All of them, shoulders slumped, faces hanging low. It was apparent that they were all tired. There was an old man that sat to Ellie's right, his silver hair slicked back, but not with any product. Rather, it was the grease from being long unwashed that held it in place. His clothes were dirty and tattered, and he smelled sour, as though he hadn't showered in days. Right in front of Ellie was a young woman. She looked as though she couldn't sit still. She was squirming in her chair and nearly constantly itching at her arms. Her hair was stringy and her face pale. Every part of her visible skin was covered in scabs all across her tiny, fragile body. Further to Ellie's left, next to Father Witherow, sat a young man who Ellie swore she recognized, but she couldn't quite recall from where. He almost acted as if he was Father Witherow's right-hand man, helping him set out snack trays and grabbing more chairs as they were needed. Halfway through the meeting, she noticed someone enter the shadowy doorway out of the corner of her eye. Someone familiar. That figure, awkward shoulders, slight hunch in his back. Was that Eddie? She thought. Why would Eddie just show up like this? The one day she took to just be herself and catch up with her friend. Couldn't he just give her one day?
Ellie, isn't that your brother?
It is. Ugh, I'll be right back.
Ellie rose from her chair, embarrassed to be disrupting the group. The little bald man who owned the gas station was sharing something about his clerk having a mental breakdown. As she left the circle, her nearly stomping pace displayed how upset she was with her brother. She grabbed him by the arm and pulled him into the stairway outside the room.
What are you doing here?
Well, you weren't at home, and I just had this, you know the feeling, that you were here. I didn't know what else to do, so I figured I'd come find you.
Lately, I feel like you just don't trust me to be alone. It's so frustrating. I came with Buffy. She said she needed me. Max has been missing since that thing got out. Everyone keeps saying it was some kind of storm. How do I look my best friend in the eye and keep lying? There was no fucking storm. Our family let out a goddamn thing that tore apart our town.
Ellie, I'm sorry. I know you've been under a lot of pressure, but you have to take a slow, deep breath right now. Do you think they have to be linked in some way? Let me just come in and sit with you guys. I haven't seen Buffy in months, and I want to hear more about what everyone has to say.
Fine. But not a word about the cave or our, what do you call it? Family bullshit? Or whatever that thing was.
They both went back to the group. Eddie loudly pulled up another chair, grating it on the floor and squeaking it sharply as he opened it. They sat through the rest of the meeting. They couldn't believe how much these people had been through and what they were willing to share. Some of it sounded like a fantasy horror story. Throughout the meeting, Ellie and Eddie were quiet. Then, toward the end, Elizabeth stood up sharply, without warning, to her friends.
Ever since I was a little girl, all I wanted was to be a mom. When career day came around, I was the first person to raise my hand because I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. Baking cookies, playing games, teaching the alphabet. When I met my husband, Jeff, I knew this was the man who was going to make that dream come true. Even Ellie knew how happy he made me. She's been my sister forever. She would tell me she could see that sparkle, that smirk, that nasty, gooey love that's in all the sappy movies. Then we found out about Max. It was the second best day of my life. Jeff and I cried in each other's arms when I walked out of the bathroom with that test. We'd been trying for so long, we didn't know if it would ever happen. The best day of my life was meeting that little guy. He sure didn't want to come into this world. He's stubborn like his father. But the second the nurse laid him on my chest, I fell in love. Jeff and Max finally made my dreams come true. I could finally be the woman I wanted to be. These past 4 years were both hard and beyond amazing. Max is the smartest little guy I know. He was crawling at 6 months, and he's been reading for years now, and he's only 4. He's only 4. Since the storm, Max has been missing. We've called the police, and they're busy. Jeff has been gone looking for my sweet baby boy, but nothing. I'm sorry, I'm taking up so much time. Ellie, you should talk about your dad. It isn't just me struggling.
At some point, Ellie had grabbed Elizabeth's hand, and Eddie ran to the back of the church to grab tissues. Everyone was quiet. The hurt was visible in the tears streaming down many of their faces. Several people near them reached out to touch her hands and offer their help to look for her lost husband and child. Ellie and Eddie were in shock. As long as they had known Elizabeth, they had never seen her show emotion like this. She always put others before herself. Then Father Witherow spoke. "Elizabeth, I know that was hard for you. You did such an amazing job sharing. Thank you for that. It's okay if you don't want to share anymore, but that doesn't mean you need to shift your feelings. It's okay not to be okay. What do you all say we wrap up for this Wednesday?" Then he addressed the group with final thoughts, mentioning how they would continue getting together weekly, but if there was anything suspicious or dark, to let him know as soon as possible.
Dark? Why would he use that term?
I was just thinking the same thing. Let's hang around and see if Buffy will introduce us to him. He's probably heard a lot in these meetings already, and maybe we can probe him for a bit more. Elizabeth, Eddie, and Ellie loitered around at the edge of the room as the crowd said their goodbyes and dispersed. After everyone else had left, they made their way to Father Witherow and the young man that was helping him clean up. Tim was bent over the concessions table and froze in the middle of mopping up some water. He felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up and a chill ran down his spine. He stood and turned slowly around to see the three of them standing in the circle of chairs. At that moment, Father Witherow's stomach sank. There was something about these three that he was being drawn to. But rather than hope, an ominous sense of dread drifted into his mind. The Hidden Oaks podcast is a collaboration between Patrick W. Marsh, Robert Dawn, and Owen Swerkstrom. The story Unforgettable Silhouette, written by Patrick W. Marsh. The Pad, written by Rob Alger and performed by Owen Swerkstrom. Struggle, written by Robin Sand. The voice of Hidden Oaks and Eddie, performed by Robert Dawn. The voice of Ellie, performed by Robin Sand. The voice of Buffy, performed by Melanie Ditter. Original music composed and performed by David Schwartz. Find more of his works at dtschwartz.com. Produced by Robert Dunn, Owen Swerkstrom, and Patrick W. Marsh. You can find out more online by visiting us at hiddenoakspodcast.com or by finding us on Twitter at Hidden Oaks Pod, as well as Facebook and Instagram at Hidden Oaks Podcast. And while you're on the website, make sure you check out our merch store for lots of cool shirts, stickers, magnets, pins, and more. Hidden Oaks is an Ironfield independent production. Thank you for listening, and until next time,